Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for our Untangle Tech Talk webinar on web filter. My name is Steve Young, and I'm the marketing team here at Untangle. Today we have Eric Newvine, who's our pre-sales engineer, and he's going to run you through all of the new changes that we have in web filter, and then give you a run through on the features and capabilities. Just kind of a few housekeeping rules that we're going to go through before we get started. If you have any audio issues, please use the audio panel to select your preferences and configure your audio options. If you select to use a phone, please dial in using the access code provided. It'll be the little audio panel on your Good webinar. Just a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, so you'll have the option to revisit and rewatch areas that you want to follow up on, and we will be answering questions throughout the presentation, so just go ahead and go to the QA box. And we have staff standing by to answer the questions. And as always, if you have any questions that you need to follow up on that is not answered, please email us at sales@untangle.com. And this wasn't put into our registration emails, but stick around to the end of our webinar because we will be giving away a $50 Amazon gift card to one lucky person who stays around. We want to reward the people who registered and showed up. So we'll be doing that drawing. And with that, I'm going to be turning it over to Eric and take it away.
Thanks, Steve. So like we said, we're going to be talking about web filter today. There's actually a lot of pretty cool new developments that have happened in web filter in the latest version of the Untangle. Just a quick overview of what the web filter app is capable of doing. It's URL-based filtering. That filtering can be done by URL, category, keyword, along with many other possible ways, which we'll go over in this presentation, to do filtering of traffic in a web browser. Our categorization database is now provided by WebRoot. We're using BrightCloud. Currently, there's more than 750 million domains and 32 billion URLs able to be categorized by the new web filter. The web filter does enforce safe search on most popular search engines. And we also have the ability to enforce restricted mode with YouTube. A couple of other things specifically about the web filter. When we talk about doing content filtering in general, most often what we're concerned about is exposure to getting access to places on the web that are either non-productive as far as the business is concerned or malicious in nature so that it's hazardous to your network if they're being accessed, because a lot of these websites get compromised. Almost daily you're seeing in the news all these different websites and services being compromised, and then their individual users, their account information is being stolen or utilized in other ways that are not desirable at all. And web filter is a really great way to make sure that that sort of behavior can't take place. Let's talk a little bit more about the newest features that we've added in version 14.2 of the Untangle. Again, the biggest change is we moved to WebRoot's categorization database. This provides a much larger data set for us to be filtering with, as well as providing a more powerful engine, if you will, with a larger set of different things that we can do in the filter. We did add the ability to filter by search term. Essentially, what that means is you do a search in your favorite, favorite search engine, Google, for example. You have the ability to automatically block based on the keywords being entered in that page. This is particularly useful for, especially schools or education verticals, public sector sort of businesses and entities because they have that extra need to be able to make sure that their users are not being exposed to content that is not appropriate. We've also added the ability to enforce restricted mode for YouTube. We've been able to, for quite some time, enforce safe search for the most popular search engines, but it wasn't until this latest release that we added the ability to restrict YouTube access as well. Jumping right into the actual web filter itself and what it's capable of doing, we'll start with the categories tab. As we said before, this is WebRoots database. There's well over, and that's a typo, there should be 32 billion websites and URLs that have been categorized at this point, and that's constantly growing. The way that categorization database works is the individual URLs can be categorized in up to 2 separate categories in this category list. So if you block either of the 2 categories that URL is in, the website should get blocked. You don't have to have all the categories for that specific URL blocked in order for it to be blocked. The block and flag columns that are listed in this screenshot that you're looking at here, those are used pretty much the same way across the board in the entire NG firewall. You're going to see those 2 options available in each of our apps. There are means of filtering the traffic. A quick note about the flag option. If you enable block, it does also automatically enable flag as well. The reason for this is flag is really meant to be an extension of block. What flagging does is in the reporting part of this application, a category or URL or whatever it happens to be that's been flagged, you can see very specific reporting information on just the flagged traffic. So if, for example, you don't want to block a category, but you're concerned about specific categories of information or a specific website, the flag option gives you the ability to still have that exposure in your reporting to see whether or not people are accessing things they shouldn't be without having to necessarily worry about blocking them outright. There are approximately 80 categories in the web filter. If you have been using our web filter previously to this version, that is a change. Previously, we had closer to 150, but we feel that the change in the categorization database is well worth the change in categorization as far as what the categories themselves that are available to you are. The other part of this too to keep in mind is with only 79 categories, that means that these URL categorizations are much more focused, much more targeted, so it'll be much easier to find specific categories for what you want to block without having to have to worry about outliers that may not be as obvious as they would be otherwise. Search terms. As we said, this is a brand new feature in version 14. Search terms are a list as far as how to enter them. You do need to enter them 1 entry per line. This can be a running list. It does not have to be added all at once. As you're discovering things that are being searched for, you can come in and add additional things to this list. You also have the ability to import a list from another source. So again, going back to the education example, if there is a list that your district or your board wants you to make sure is being blocked all the time, you can easily import that list into the web filter without having to enter each one manually. The import function in WebFilter for the search terms does support multiple file formats. Again, if you've used the Untangle, you've seen that the import is available in many other locations outside of the search terms. Currently, this is the only one that supports imports beyond the JSON array file format. We also support comma separated and new line separated formats for search terms. Just like with our categories, the block and flag options are available in search terms to give you that extra flexibility, just like with the categories. I skipped over the site lookup tab, but I will mention it quickly. It is a fairly useful tab as far as getting used to how the new categorization database works. If you're not sure about where a URL is categorized, you can use that tab to actually look up a given URL to see what it's categorized as, and we'll take a look at that closer in the demo. Above and beyond categories and search terms, you have the ability to block or pass individual URLs using block sites or pass sites. When you enter a site into either of these tabs, it does support wildcarding, as you can see in this second option right here. A couple of important things to note here. When you're entering them, you do not need to include the full URL, http:// etc. You just need the actual URL itself, the host name, if you will. The other thing that I wanted to point out while we're in these tabs is the hierarchy of how things are applied in the web filter. It's important to note that in web filter, the rules are applied from right to left. So what this means is if you put something in a pass site entry, it will override anything you have in block sites, and it will also override what you have blocked in categories. So if you're blocking social networking and you allow Facebook.com in pass sites, you will be able to access Facebook. And this gets more important the further to the right you go, making the different configurations that are available, because things can get very complex very quickly if you're not keeping track of what's in each tab, or if you have multiple people that are actually making changes to the configurations. The Rules tab is a way for you to more granularly control blocking or allowing access to sites. The problem that you run into with the previous tabs, search terms, categories, block sites, etc., is you're limited to just URLs or specific keywords. So if you want to conditionally allow or block access, it's very difficult to do without the Rules tab. The Rules tab gives you access to additional conditions from other applications, as well as networking level type conditions as well, so that you can be very, very granular with what you allow and don't allow to have access to. The other thing that the Rules tab allows you to do is to block specific file types from being downloaded. This is the only way to do that with WebFilter, and we'll go over that in more detail in the demo portion. As you can see in this screenshot, there are some other things you can do beyond just blocking sites. This top example here is a good example of what we're looking at. You have the ability to create a rule to block content size. So if you want to allow people to have access to the games category, for example, but you don't want them to be able to download games onto the machines, you can set a content length that's appropriate to make sure that those files can't be downloaded to the machines on your network. The last tab in Web Filter is Advanced. There's actually a lot of different things going on in here. First and foremost, Web Filter is able to filter HTTPS traffic to a degree. It utilizes SNI information, that's server name indication. Essentially what this is doing is it's looking at the host name and the related information available for that host name to be able to block that traffic. This information is available in the packet headers as they're coming into the Untangle, so we can still see them without having to have to decrypt the packet itself. This is restricted though, because you only can block by host name. So if you want to block youtube.com, the majority of the time that will work just fine with just Web Filter. However, if you want to be more granular and you want to block specific videos, then you have trouble with this without the SSL inspector, because we need to be able to decrypt that packet to see the rest of the URL beyond the base host name youtube.com. And that's the key differentiator as far as what we can do with Web Filter by itself versus using SSL inspector in conjunction with it. It works. It's just not as efficient, for lack of a better term, than what you can do with a full-blown SSL inspection engine. As I said previously, we do enforce safe search for most popular search engines. So Bing, MSN, Yahoo, Google, all of those ones that everybody uses, we do enforce that safe search with that option enabled. It's important to note here that this option requires SSL inspector to work. Using SNI alone is not enough because it goes beyond that base host name, like I was saying. So you do have to have SSL inspector to utilize that option. The same thing applies to restricted mode for YouTube as well. It does also require SSL inspector. The other thing to point out that's important here is both of these options, when they're enabled, the users are essentially at the mercy of the service provider. We are not controlling what Google considers safe or what YouTube considers safe. That's all being handled by those service providers themselves. So all we're doing is enforcing the option in the browser on that specific account behind the Untangle. We can't control what is and is not being allowed to be viewed on those sites. It's being controlled by the site itself. Some other options in here, quick protocol. If you're using Google Chrome, you're probably very familiar with this protocol. It is an alternative port 443 protocol. It uses UDP instead of TCP. If you've run into it before, this does pose a bit of an issue for some filtering engines, because if you're using UDP instead of TCP, that's not considered HTTPS officially. So in that case, we're not necessarily able to filter it the same way, if at all. So we give you the option to just block that protocol outright and force Chrome and other browsers that use Quick to have to use the standard TCP port 443 for HTTPS. You have the option to block pages from IP-only hosts. This is a pretty fringe case option. There aren't a lot of well-known web pages on the internet right now that don't have a URL tied to them. But that option is there in the event that you come across one that is accessible by IP only. You can tell Web Filter to just block those outright. We also have the option to pass referring websites if the referrer is in the pass sites. Essentially what this option does is if you search for a website in Google, Google is acting as the referrer. So if you have Google in your past sites, the site you've searched for is also going to be passed. So you have the ability to disable or enable that depending on your need. We can restrict access to Google applications and domains. Basically what this does is if you put in your Google hosted domain, your network is only able to access your domain behind the Untangle. You would have to disable this if you wanted to get access to google.com, for example. Use case for this, untangle.com. If we said that's a Google hosted domain, we could put that into this field right here. And with that option enabled, we would only be able to access Google Drive, Mail, all of the different apps that are part of the Google Suite that are tied specifically to untangle.com. So you can't access your Gmail, personal Gmail. You can't access your personal Drive. You can't access any of those other things that are not specifically tied to the domain. And then, of course, the last feature in here is the unblock feature. What this allows you to do is add a section to your block page when a website is being blocked by WebFilter to give users the option to get access to a site that would otherwise be blocked. You do have the option to make this a temporary or permanent unblock, and you also have the ability to password protect this, so only specific users can do it. And then, of course, the last part of WebFilter, just like with all of our other apps, is our reporting. As you can see on the left, there are a lot of reports here. This is easily the most proliferous number of reports as far as a single application is concerned. We're far and away, this is the most reports available for a single app that's available in the NG Firewall. These reports range from general usage to specific, events happening in the web filter itself, so you can see the individual sites being accessed by the users on your network. And just like with every other report that's available in our NG Firewall, these can be customized or filtered to meet specific criteria for what you're looking for. Okay, I'm going to jump over to the demo real quick here so that we can take a look at how some of these features work. Categories, as I said, that's fairly self-explanatory. One thing that's worth pointing out here, this set of 6 categories that are here, these are enabled by default. So as soon as you install WebFilter into your NG Firewall, you have that layer of protection without needing to do any configuring at all. We make absolutely certain that your users are protected from the worst of the worst on the internet as soon as you install the WebFilter. You, of course, do have the option to disable any of these. These are not hard-coded. You can turn them off, but we turn them on by default because these are the most common things that people want to block all the time. If you're looking for a specific category or a specific type of URL and you're not sure where to find it, the filter field at the top will give you a quick, easy way to look for what you're looking for. So let's do streaming. And it shows you the categories that are related to streaming. In this case, there's 2 of them. So that just gives you a quick, easy way to find the category you're looking for to make sure you're blocking or allowing specific types of traffic. Search terms. As I had said, this is line by line, single entry only if you're adding them manually. So you can enter a single entry, but if you want to do something like this, it's going to treat that as a single entry. It's not going to treat it as two single entries. So if you've used the entry for creating rules in the Untangle, you're used to seeing this comma separated entry format. In the case of search terms, it's going to treat this whole thing as a string. So it'll be one term. It won't block both violence and bombs. It will only block if somebody types in violence, comma, bombs. Just to quickly show you the fields available for import. It's very similar to what you see in the other import sections of the Untangle product. You have the option to replace your settings, add them to the beginning or the end of the list. It's up to you how you want to do that. When you want to import something, you do need to make sure that you're accessing the Untangle from the machine that has the file on it. Because when you hit browse, it's pulling up my computer. So that's the only way that you can import that file. All right, the site lookup tab. As I was saying earlier, the site lookup is really useful if you're trying to get a feel for this new database to see what's being categorized by the webroot database in which category. So if we do facebook.com, make sure that's a period, and hit search, it shows that it is in social networking. And that's the only category that it's in. We do, just like in the previous web filter, give you the option to suggest a different category, and that would submit the request to the vendor. Or you can just go directly to webroot's site and make the request on that site. But this is a useful tool if there's a website that you're not sure how it should be categorized. You enter the URL and it'll spit out the correct category for what it's in. Blocked sites and past sites, again, this is single entry, and it does support wildcarding. Pretty straightforward, this piece of it. Same with past sites. I didn't cover past clients in the previous slides because this is another one of those not used that often option feature that's available in the web filter. Basically what past clients does is it gives you the ability, without having to have to create a different policy for a one-off use case, the ability to exempt a user or group of users from being filtered by web filter. When you add a IP address or range of IPs in past clients, they will not be filtered at all by web filter. This is particularly useful if, for example, you want to exempt somebody from web filter, but you don't necessarily want to exempt them from everything else as far as applications are concerned. Maybe you want them to still be scanned for viruses. You still want them to be scanned for application usage. In that case, a bypass rule doesn't work. So we give you the ability to bypass just the single app without having to create a new policy. The rules tab. I wanted to show quickly how you can block file types in web filter. What we do is we come in to create a new rule in the rules tab, give it a name, block exes and zips. Add a condition. And you'll see that we have both request file extension and response file extension. Technically, either of these will work. Personally, I usually recommend people use the request file extension because that is the name of the file coming from the client itself, so from the browser. The response file extension is what the server you're requesting from answers back with. And there's a chance that that may not be the same thing. So because of that, I recommend using the request option when you're doing file type blocking. So once you've added that condition, you just add the extension without the period, and you can add multiples here. So I can do zip, exe, DLL, whatever it happens to be, to a single rule. Because I just named it exes and zips, I'll leave it at zip and exes. And then you change the action to block. And that's it. That is how you would block the ability to download zip and zip and exe files using WebFilter. If instead you wanted to just monitor the downloads of those files, you could leave it as pass and leave the flag option enabled here. And then you can see every time that's being downloaded and see whether or not it's something that you need to worry about. The other thing that's important to point out here, the rules tab in WebFilter is the same type of hierarchy as rules in other parts of the NG firewall. They're being applied top down. So the first rule that it hits that matches is the action that's going to be taken. So you do need to take some care when you're creating rules to make sure that the rules are in the appropriate order that you need them to be in, to make sure that things are being blocked or allowed as you need them to be. All right, and the only other thing that I wanted to show you here was the unblock option, just so you could see these features. If you select temporary, you can set the timeout for how long they have access. The default is 1 hour, but you can set this to whatever you want it to be. The permanent option, what that does is it adds a past site entry for that website. So it's automatically being allowed for everybody, unless you've, of course, created a rule to block it for a specific user. Password protected option, you actually have two choices. You can just use the admin password for the Untangle, or you can set a custom password. The custom password is particularly useful because this gives you the ability to change that password periodically to prevent abuse of the unblock option. The other thing that's in here that I didn't really talk a whole lot about is this clear URL, category URL cache. This is here just purely as a troubleshooting tool. Occasionally, the categorizations for a URL can change. When that does, you'll find that the Untangle, if it has previously seen that URL, is going to keep a cached entry for what category that URL is in. We automatically periodically trim that cache, but to make absolutely certain that a change that you've been, maybe you requested a change for a categorization for a website and you're notified that it's been changed. To make absolutely certain that that categorization is being applied, you come in and click this clear category URL cache button, and then it would do all of its lookups over again, as if it had never done a lookup before. The last thing that I wanted to talk about here, you'll notice that we have two different apps for relating to web traffic, Web Filter and Web Monitor. The Web Monitor has the exact same functions as what Web Filter does, with one key exception. Web Monitor does not allow you to actually block traffic. What the Web Monitor allows you to do is to view detail on what people are doing online, but it doesn't give you the ability to take action on it. In a lot of cases, this is okay. If you're using a guest wireless network, for example, and you just want to make sure people aren't abusing the free wireless access to the internet, Web Monitor is a great use for that. But on the flip side of that coin, trying to use Web Monitor in something that's requiring a heavy compliance, like, again, a school, where you need to be able to make sure that certain things are blocked, got to use Web Filter, because the Web Monitor just isn't enough as far as a tool is concerned to make sure that that layer of protection is there. All right. So the last thing, the other thing I want to talk through about the web filter is some of the common things that we run into as far as troubleshooting the web filter. The problem that I have is apparently my slide did not save. So I'm going to skip over this and see if we've got questions that I can help answer in the GoToMeeting.
Yeah, we do. We had a couple of questions that they wanted to kind of touch base on. Can you go over wildcards one more time?
Sure. As far as using them in blocked sites and pass sites, wildcarding gives you the ability to make sure that a host or domain and all of its subdomains are blocked or allowed. So if I pull up again really quick the box so we can take a look at how this would work. When we're talking about wildcarding, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. The most, obviously it's a star is the wild card. But the most common way that we recommend doing it is to exclude the period. So for example, Microsoft.com is a great example because there's tons of subdomains at Microsoft.com. So we can do star Microsoft.com. And that will wildcard all the subdomains of Microsoft.com, but it also will wildcard other things as well. So it could, for example, wildcard mymicrosoft.com without a dot. So even other domains that have Microsoft.com in them would be allowed here. If you know that those other domains exist, you can add a period. And then it's only going to match subdomains of Microsoft.com. So www, home, my, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason why you were seeing the asterisk on the end as well is twofold as well. It's to give you the ability to wildcard domains with multiple extensions. So it can have .com, .net, .biz, .info, all of them being passed or blocked. But additionally, it gives you the option to take action on pages beyond just the domain name. So Microsoft.com/myhome, for example, as opposed to just ending at Microsoft.com. Does that answer the question that they were asking?
Probably.
Okay. All right, cool.
I think that's one of the major ones. Everything else, I think our staff have pretty much covered, so I think we're pretty good on questions for now.
Okay, awesome.
I'd like to kind of give away the Amazon gift card, so I'm just gonna do a random number generator here, and then pick the name that coincides with that. And it looks like our winner for today is Mark Tinder. Mark Tinder. I will be reaching out to you after this webinar and providing you with the gift card.
Congratulations, Mark.
Yeah, and keep on submitting those questions. I'll leave this up for another few minutes, but thank you, Eric, again for your presentation. And again, if you have any questions that are not answered, within the next few minutes, and when this webinar ends, please send it in to sales@untangle.com. And again, sales@untangle.com. Okay, thank you. Okay, it seems like we got through majority of the questions. Thank you all again for attending, and we're going to be ending the webinar now. Again, if you have any more questions, either email us at sales@untangle.com, or if you have a specific technical question, you can email us at support@untangle.com. Thank you all for attending, and have a good rest of your day.